Good afternoon and welcome back. This week, which is week 9 of 13, we'll be learning about emotions and stress, subjective stress. The week 8 test scores are back in. There was a nice average of 75% and a relatively tighter standard deviation. I like to see that, of 11%. And you can thank the undergraduate program coordinator, Dave Bourgeois, for writing most of the questions. Today, we'll be learning about emotions. So what are they? Theories of emotion. Where do they come from? And we'll also think about emotions as adaptive. You probably noticed an undercurrent in this course of adaptive behavior. Now, school can be stressful and it can sometimes be an emotional journey. And there are many people here, many professionals here to support you through that. So with that, I'd like to welcome and invite Emma Sylvester, who's our learning skills strategist with the Student Success Center, which I look forward to hearing about.
Thanks, Tanya. Hi, everybody. So my name is Emma. Skip through. Okay, so as mentioned, I am from the Student Success Center. This is quite a new area on campus, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm just going to take a couple minutes of your time before we go into lecture. I am a learning skills strategist. My background is in science. It's in marine and freshwater biology, actually, which is why I like to have this picture of me foraging in the intertidal zone. Also, just to let students know that it is great to have a diverse range of interests and experiences that you bring with you everywhere you go. Sometimes people get a bit stressed out about their trajectory, and so I just like to kind of say that you never know where you're going to end up. I didn't know I was going to be in education, or at the new area that is the Student Success Center. We exist under Student Affairs and Services, and we have a variety of different programs that you can see in these honeycombs here that are supported by various roles that are on the outside of this diagram. So we provide welcome weeks. We do a lot of work involved in integrating within the social aspect of the SMU community. And as a learning skills strategist, my focus is on academic support in various different ways. That's me. So I provide support to students to understand and apply approaches to enhance learning and academic performance. That, I don't know if that sounds meaningful to you just as a little tagline, but that's sort of helpful for me to start off. I do this primarily through 2 different ways, and that's one-on-one coaching, which is available online or in person, and also through workshops. Coaching provides a personalized conversation. So they're very informal. They're usually 50 minutes long, but they can go for shorter if we don't use all that time. But it's to provide you with some personalized advice. It's evidence-based, and it's to get an idea of where you are and what your academic needs are. So if you're more into that kind of like intimate, let's have a conversation about my experience approach, then that's there for you. Workshops, on the other hand, they introduce new strategies. They allow you to become an effective learner. You can connect with other students that way, which is really nice. My workshops are quite engaging and involved. We have conversations about things. So it's a little bit more like, okay, let's see everything that exists and take some information from that, as opposed to what is my current experience, and Emma, how can you help me? But both are valid and both are really great. I do also have drop-in hours. So you can just kind of pop in and say, I'm struggling with this. How can you help me? Either way, my aim is to learn about your experiences and your goals and your aims and meet you where you are and co-create a plan that will work for you. It also doesn't have to be a one-stop shop. I'm here for you throughout your entire academic career. And I'm also here to help you navigate other campus resources. At the Student Success Center, we sort of think of ourselves as campus navigators. So if you come to me and you would like some support in something that's not really my forte, that is okay, because I can help you find the people who can help you with that. Just to kind of talk a little bit about, I'm talking about how I can help you and what I'm here for, but like, what are we actually talking about when we talk about learning skills? What is it that would bring you to me? There's a variety of things, but that looks like goal setting, that looks like motivation. If you're struggling perhaps with being motivated, and that can be at any scale. That can be motivation to complete your degree, to finish the semester. That can be motivation to finish your assignment. So it ranges quite a bit. That looks like time management and looking at actual strategies and platforms and tools that we would use to help ourselves with self-regulation. That looks like effective study strategies, which will vary depending on your courses, but depending on what works best for you, depending on what works best for them, we can come up with a plan together and learn some ideas. That looks like note-taking and listening. So how we can improve your in-lecture experience or your reading experience. That looks like working and studying in groups, focus and concentration, procrastination. You'll notice that some of these are going from less concrete skill set, structure and strategy, and more to habit of mind. And that is also something that we talk about. I find that distinction sometimes helpful because the narratives and the meaning that we create for ourselves through our experiences can be as impactful as the stepwise plan for what we do, and they interact with each other. And so I'm here for both of them and to hear about both of them. That also looks like exam prep. So exam writing strategies beyond just study strategies, as well as effective reading and memory strategies. So this is a lot just about how we learn. This is obviously related to things that you've learned in class, both previously in terms of how we learn, as well as your emotional experience, like what you'll talk about today. I also just wanted to briefly state that my approach, I'm the only learning skills strategist on campus because it's a new area. And if the way that we talk and the way that you engage with me doesn't really quite jive, there's so many other resources for you for academic support specifically, either for specific classes or just generally. And I'm more than happy to help you navigate that as well. All of my workshops are also available in person or online. I deliver them in a hybrid format, which is strange to kind of navigate as you're familiar with this class, but does make it more accessible for whatever way you prefer to engage. I would love to see you. I'd love to meet you. I'd love to chat with you. I have a number of workshops that are planned for the remainder of the month. And then I also have a sort of end of term series that involves workshops like exam prep, effective study strategies, as well as open study halls. So they're you can bring a friend, they're more just an open study space. I'll have a ton of different materials to work with, and you can get some support from me, as well as from some writing center staff that will be there if you're focusing more on papers to end your term as well. You can learn more about that at smu.ca/student success. I would be super down if you opened your phones. I know you don't usually hear that in class, but your phones or your laptops you have right now and just went to that website. There is information there to book a one-on-one coaching appointment with me, as well as to register for workshops that are coming up. And you also are welcome to email me. I have the student success at smu.ca email there, should you just have a generic support question. But if you want to talk to me directly, I'm more than happy for that as well. So feel free to take a photo of this slide if you'd like, or just look up that website and follow up. I would love to see you, and thanks so much for having me. Hope to see you in the future. Cool.
Very much. Your commitment to student success is inspiring.
Thanks.
And I will post that information on Brightspace, as well as these slides, and also the invitation to the workshops.
Cool.
Great.
Okay. Thanks,
Thank
Tanya.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone. See you later. Okay, so this is the unit on emotion, and I'll ask a big philosophical question. What is emotion? You talk about feelings, about having feelings. Nobody? Anybody want to hazard a guess at what an emotion is? Yes, Joseph, I know I can count on you.
It's like a response to something.
Yes, it is. It's a response of your whole being. Now, yes.
It's an adaptive response to if our needs are being met or not.
You are onto the adaptive part. So yeah, ideally it's adaptive, but sometimes the way we handle our emotions can be maladaptive. But you're very on to the point that ideally they are an adaptive response. Sometimes we manifest them in ways they aren't, but we can learn skills as we grow in how to manage emotions. So when you have a feeling, what's happening in your mind, in your body? Think of happiness, sadness, anger. Yes. Can you say it out louder because I can't hear?
Chemical response in the brain.
Yeah, so there would be brain activity and neurochemical activity behind that because any psychological event is simultaneously a biological event. So yes, that is true. What else is happening when I feel, let's say I feel sad? Yeah, you can read it on my body. So now you can learn skills in hiding these. You can learn skills in fake smiling, but there are reactions of your body that are observable to other people. So when you're happy, there's something called a Duchenne smile. That's different from a fake smile. So a Duchenne smile involves your eyes. A fake smile doesn't. But yes, there is something going on physically with your body when you have emotions. When you feel sad, you might kind of slouch a bit or make your body smaller if you feel afraid. For instance, sort of threatened body language versus confident body language. So more expansive. The gestures that people make when they win, when they go, yeah, or that expansive body language is universal. So people cross-culturally have those behaviors. And if you want to seem more confident or in control, things you can do are stand with your feet apart, right? Versus with your legs like that, right? So you put your hands on your hips to use more expansive body language. Sadness, right? You can see that in a frown. Somebody's buried a frown. What else is going on? Is it just body language when you're sad or happy? I think we're still missing one component. We've got that it's adaptive or ideally adaptive. We've got that there's a brain basis behind it. We've got that it involves body language. They're all feelings in the body. If you can kind of feel your stress right there. If you feel joy, does that feel like something to you? Does it feel like lightness? If you are anxious, do you have butterflies? So there's sensations. And we're still missing one really critical component of an emotion. Yes?
That's generally involuntary.
It is a reaction. I think you're getting at that. And we have some level of choice in how we express it. Like if you're feeling happy that you're at a funeral and you know that you should kind of keep a straight face there. But yeah, you're onto it being a reaction. We're still missing something really big that comes with being human. If you're sad, if you're having the emotion of sadness, is that just a physiological sensation?
No.
So I can't hear you.
How we interpret our emotions?
Yeah, so it's about thought as well. So if you're sad, you might have sad thoughts, right? I don't have the energy to do this. This is pointless. Everything is terrible. If you're feeling anxious, you're probably having anxious thoughts. I don't know what's going to happen. Anything could happen. I can't deal with this. You're angry. You're also having angry thoughts. How dare they? Okay, so it is a response of the whole organism, the whole person that involves physiological arousal, expressive behavior, and conscious experience. And just like you said, that experience relates to your interpretations. So somebody could have the same feeling of flutters and interpret that differently. They could say, I'm anxious, or you could say, I'm excited, depending on context and beliefs. Now, here are some faces. Do you have an ability to read the emotions that are going on there? Like, what's happening in A? And see how easy that was? You all kind of get it. And smiles are smiles the whole world over. What about this person? What's going on there? Surprise, exactly. See how fast you are exactly that? What's this one? Fear. And what's D? Sadness. And what is E?
Angry. Frustration.
Yeah, I think it is. I haven't looked these up in like a year, but I believe that's right. And then this one,
Something chills.
I think it's disgust. Yeah, disgust. So basic emotions are hardwired. They're universal. They're observed cross-culturally. You see these expressions in people who are blind from birth, right? Who's never seen a facial expression on another person. They still smile when they're happy. Carol Izard identified 10 basic emotions: joy, interest or excitement, surprise, sadness, anger, disgust, contempt, fear, shame, guilt, and said that the more complex emotions, like say pride, are combinations of more basic emotions, just like when we're talking about that sense of touch, that it's based on 4 basic kinds of receptors. That right? So the more complex feelings are based on a combination of primary feelings. Now, I'm taking it on the authority of the textbook, as likely you are as well, that there was some good method that established and supports the claim that there are these 10 basic elementary emotions. There are 10, these are the 10. I have not reviewed those methods. I haven't sat down and read the primary research, which is kind of an important step in critical thinking in any kind of a theory. And so I don't know how solid the basis for that claim is. And I bring that up, first of all, because it's a good critical thinking practice when anyone throws a theory at you that's like, this is the way the world is. But I brought it up because I noticed a contempt on the list of basic or sort of elementary emotions. But I am aware that other theorists consider contempt to be a blend of anger and disgust. I would say contempt is a more complex emotion. So maybe contempt is a compound emotion, if you please. And then I look at that list and I think, well, what about guilt versus shame? Like, what's the difference between those? Could guilt be higher order? Or, it's like you did something wrong and you also know that you actually did it and maybe you're lying. What's going on there? Right? So I have an urge to check this theory out in more depth, but I don't have the time. But if you do, you might want to look into it. Speaking as a mother, it surprises me that love isn't a primary emotion. And it makes me wonder if Izard was maybe thinking of love as complicated romantic love. I don't know. That comes to mind. Now, there are also secondary emotions, meta emotions. You can have feelings about your feelings. You can be sad that you're sad. Why am I sad? Why can't I be happy just like everyone else? This is terrible. That's like meta sad. You can be ashamed that you're angry, right? You can feel relieved that you are happy. You can be meta happy, delighted that you're happy about this. You can imagine how this complexifies your emotional life. People will sometimes tell you to let go of a feeling. Hard, if not impossible, to do that with a primary emotion. And maybe you even shouldn't, but you can sometimes question secondary emotions and what they mean and where they're coming from. Like if you're angry, maybe it's enough to be angry without adding the feeling of being ashamed that you're angry, right? Because then you have 2 problems. And maybe it isn't even necessary to construct your anger as a problem, but maybe you should be angry. See how you're making life more complicated with the secondary emotions? So maybe it can be okay to be angry. Maybe it can be okay to be sad. And you can free yourself a bit by giving yourself permission to feel your feelings. So just as you said, emotions are adaptive responses that support survival. And we'll come back to that later. Here are a couple of early theories about how thoughts and feelings are connected. There's the James Lang theory, and that theory would say that there's a stimulus, like an angry dog, and then you have something like a reflexive physiological arousal. Your heart starts to beat fast. And then you interpret that, so that's the emotion of fear. My heart is beating fast, so I am scared. But maybe there's some limitations to that. Like, how do you know what the correct interpretation or cognition is? So if your heart beats fast, how do you know if you are scared of the dog or excited because you love dogs? And there's Cannon-Bard's theory. And that theory is that an emotion arousing stimulus, your angry dog, simultaneously triggers. So this is now at the same time instead of leads to this, leads to that, right? Simultaneously triggers the physiological response, say your heart beating, and the subjective experience of the emotion, say fear. And so this theory would say that these responses of the body and mind run parallel. And well, we can question that because there are people who have damage, spinal damage, who maybe can't feel below their neck or who can't feel below, say, their waist. And people with those conditions actually feel their emotions differently. So anger feels different when you can't feel those sort of angry responses in your body. It's a more cerebral, less visceral feeling, okay? So our thoughts and our cognitions influence our emotions in many ways, and including in a top-down interpretation of a stimuli. So you can assess whether something's a threat. Yes, it's a threat, then I'm afraid. Okay, it's not, then I'm not. So it's going to be more complicated than this. Schechter and Singer have a two-factor theory that importantly involves interpretation. And they would say that emotions have an ingredient of physical arousal, so your heart is beating, and then you appraise that cognitively to say, I'm afraid, or I'm excited. And they would say this theory would hold that emotional experience requires a conscious interpretation of what that feeling of arousal actually means. They did a study in 1962 where they injected people with adrenaline. And it's a bit of a complicated setup. In one group, people are told that they're going to get an injection of adrenaline and it's going to make your body feel like this. It's going to raise your heart rate and make you feel a bit fluttery, that kind of thing. But in another condition, people were not told that that was adrenaline. And some of them were in a room where the confederates of the experimenter, do you know what I mean by confederate? Somebody's working for the experimenter. You think they're another study subject, but they're actually in on it. They're a research assistant. So confederate of the experimenter acts euphoric, or maybe you're in a condition where the confederate that's also in the room acts angry. And what people did was interpret their own feeling of increased arousal according to what that other person, the confederate, was showing them. Like, this is euphoria, this is anger, okay? So when the emotion is felt, physiological arousal occurred and people kind of looked around their environment to search for additional cues to help label that arousal, to understand what it is. And in that study, the subjects interpreted this agitation in line with the emotion that the other people in the room appeared to be feeling. They're not really actually angry or euphoric. The experimenters have paid them to act that way, right? And that's called a spillover effect. So the emotional labels kind of spilled over from others to interpret your emotion. So a spillover effect is when an emotional reaction to one thing affects your emotional reactions to other things, or maybe other people's reactions to other things. You can imagine how that can spiral. There's a study by Dutton and Arrow on the misattribution of arousal. And what they did is they had a confederate, it was a young woman, approach men and ask them if they wanted to participate in a research study, in which case she'd have to get their number. And after this, I believe the researchers asked the men whether they sort of found the woman attractive, and they could also count, how many times she got their numbers. But men were more likely to find the Confederate attractive and to sign up to participate in the study if they were approached after they had come off one of these suspension bridges. So they were feeling kind of excited, and then they meet a young woman, and compared to men who were not coming off such a bridge, they're in a stable, boring environment, they thought the woman was more attractive. So applying this psychological knowledge, what are good places to take a date? So probably not to a lecture, because then the boringness of the lecture, right? The way that feels in your body, it sort of gets transferred or spills over. So maybe your date, feeling that boredom, will also think that you are boring. So maybe an amusement park, roller coaster ride, scary movies, all of these things might make you seem more excited because the person is getting excited. Bike ride. Now, you've learned that memory has a two-track system, that there's one track for your explicit, declarative, conscious memories, and one for your implicit, unconscious learning and memory. And emotions work like that too. Joseph Ledoux and Robert Zions, I know it looks like Zhejiang, but it is in fact Zions, argued that some simple emotional responses occur instantly and kind of outside conscious awareness before any cognitive processing occurs, a bit like a reflex. Okay, but then there's also a track where there's more deliberate thinking. So let's say here's what they call the speedy low road. So you see the fearful stimulus, the dog, say, and then that goes to your thalamus. Do you guys remember what the thalamus does in the brain? Bit of a switchboard. So in this sort of speedy low road, the thalamus will send that to the amygdala, which is a midbrain region where you get an emotional response. And decorticated animals like cats still have those emotional responses to a stimulus. And then there's maybe a high road. So you see the dog and it goes to your thalamus, but then your thalamus can sort of send that to your cortex, to your wizard brain instead of your lizard brain. And then maybe you'll have a slightly slower, but perhaps more adaptive response. Lazarus noted that some top-down cognitive functions like threat appraisal can be involved, but those emotional responses can still operate without conscious thought. And he suggested that many important emotions come from our interpretations or from our inferences. And what that means to say is that we have both tracks. Just as you mentioned, there's brain activity behind your emotions. When you have fear, certain brain circuits, certain brain structures are being activated. And when you feel joy, there'll be different ones. So we can use technology like brain scans, like EEG, that imaging technology we talked about, was it last week, to see where that might be happening. There's some lateralization, and they discovered this with electroconvulsive shock therapy, I believe. So at one point, a treatment for depression was electroconvulsive shock. Seen that movie? What movie am I thinking about? It's tip of the tongue phenomenon. I can't think about it. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And the patient gets like shocks to his head. That procedure can knock out one side, but not the other. And they found that when they knocked out the left, when they knocked out the right, so that means the left is working, that then people were happy, that they were euphoric. And when they did the opposite, knocked out the left so that the right was working, then people could be really pretty depressed. So there's some lateralization of function there. Now, one thing that I haven't looked into is who's right, who's left. Like when they say left frontal lobe, is that my left or your left? Does anyone know which left it is? I think it might be the observer's left and is coming from the observer's perspective, but I'm not sure. Now, we also learned that we're all born with a temperament. Okay, there's some things about personality that are hardwired. And one of those is the personality trait of neuroticism, which in that context refers to emotional stability, or rather the lack of it. So some babies are happy babies and tend to stay that way. Some babies are cranky babies and tend to stay that way. Though if you're a naturally cranky person, over your life, you'll become a bit more agreeable as you learn skills to manage that. But fundamentally, we have a bit of a preset where some people are kind of happier than others, and some people are sadder than others, naturally. So there's some heritability, let's say 36%, to your emotional stability. So if you are, a person that has lots of ups and downs, look at your family, maybe you have a mom or a dad that also has a lot of ups and downs. You have a really even keel, your mom and your dad, are they also like that? We've also talked about the neurological phenomenon of habituation, how if you have, let's say, a sea slug and you squirt it with water, like at first it cares and then it kind of learns not to care. Or if there's a noisy fan in the room, at first you notice it and then you stop noticing it. And that also happens to the things that make us happy and sad. We adapt to them. So we'll often think that, wow, if I graduate, if I get that dream job, if once I have my wedding, I'll be really happy. In reality, people kind of go back to baseline, get used to that really quickly. So when you have that big moment, it might even feel a little anticlimactic. And we also do the opposite. We tell ourselves, if I lose my job, if my partner leaves me, then I will be devastated and everything will be awful. And what usually really happens is that, yeah, there's a shock at first, maybe, and then people kind of go back, they adapt and go back to being okay and find that set point again. If you've heard of a concept called health-related quality of life, there are models in epidemiology that assume quality of life from health. And they would assume that if you're healthy, you have a really good quality of life. And the model would predict that if you're unhealthy, if you lose certain kinds of functions, then you have a really low quality of life. What do we find in the real world? Yes, in people with chronic illnesses, with disabilities, there are higher rates of depression, there are higher rates of suicide, but there are also a lot more barriers, like to getting a job, for instance. There's also more social exclusion. So sometimes it can be hard to tease apart what causes what. But one thing that we do observe is that what plays out in the real world is not as dire as the prediction. And people with disabilities that you might think of as crushing, like how could I live with that, actually can have very thriving, happy lives, that they can successfully adapt to that. Okay, so the models tend to not pan out on the low end. We tend to judge things relative to our prior experience. So what you might think of as a poor outcome in your life might be a dream outcome to somebody else, right? Somebody who had less. And that prior experiences influence our feelings of satisfaction and dissatisfaction and success and failure. Context matters. Okay, so you could be happy about something that somebody else would be sad about. You have to be sad about something you'd be happy about, depending on context, prior experience, expectations. It's also an interesting feedback effect. Like the body and mind are connected in a way that loops. So research shows that if you get people to bite a pencil in a way that forces a grin, they actually feel happier, because that muscle movement or that muscle positioning is telling your brain that you're doing a happy thing. So your brain might think, okay, I'm happy. And if you were to sort of screw up your face into a frown, you're also telling yourself that you feel sad. So, if you're kind of slumping and slouching, that's not going to make you feel better. But if you make yourself stand up straight, you make yourself assume expansive gestures, right? Sort of act confident, and you might feel confident. And other people will also think you're confident. I might come across you as confident now because of the tone of voice I'm using, sometimes because of the way I dress, but really I'm not, right? There's a part of that that's performative. But we can sort of socially construct the idea that, I'm in charge and in command or in control, right? Part of that for everyone is performative. Empathy is also based on reading and mimicking other people's expressions. So if somebody is happy, they're smiling, and you smile back at them, that's an empathetic response, right? Like letting your face mimic another person's expression, right? And acting as another person acts. So as you're able to show at the beginning of class, it's pretty easy to detect emotions. And there are involuntary reactions on people's faces. So when you're happy and your face lights up, it does that in a particular way. That's called a Duchenne smile. That's not quite the same thing as a fake smile. Fake smiles tend to not activate the eye region. But we can also learn to control our emotional expressions. In some cultures, it's expected that people be on a pretty even keel. Say British culture is known for that. That's just stiff upper lip thing. In other cultures, it's much more appropriate and accepted to be emotional and to be angry. Within even this culture, I would say there's differences in subcultures, and emotional controls in this culture is a bit of a class indicator. So people who are kind of higher up the social status ladder are expected to have a lot of emotional control. And one of the ways that once you go out into professional life, that workplace bullying works is that sometimes people try to provoke you into an outburst. And the way you win is by remaining totally controlled and not reacting to provocation. Right? Because in our society, emotional control is a class indicator. The gestures, the facial expressions, and the voice tones that we use to read other people's emotions, that's part of our theory of mind, are not always there. They're not at all there in written communication. So they're not there in email and text messages, and we can misinterpret people's emotions really easily. We can misread them. It's an avenue where we can project our own feelings onto them. Thus, email, text are not great avenues for managing conflict, as I'm sure you probably already discovered. There are gender differences in expression of emotion. Women and men tend to sort of have the same average happiness level, but women tend to have more ups and downs. So more variant, same average. Women do tend to be better at reading emotions overall, with the exception of anger, and tend to be more empathic and tend to express more emotions with their faces. Now, most of this research would be done in people in Western cultures. I don't know how that might vary cross-culturally. That's something that you could look into if you're interested in. Here's an interesting study. This is an androgynous face. So this face is computer generated and it's built to be kind of halfway between a super masculine and halfway between a super feminine face. And when the person is smiling, people are more likely to assume that face is female, to label it as female. And when that face is angry, they're more likely to label it as male. And I will add that there's also, we tend not to talk about this, but there's body language of dominance and submission, and smiling is be a submissive gesture, right? It's an appeasement gesture as well. So I don't know how that's tied to gender through, let's say, body language of dominance and submission. Anger is seen as more appropriate for dominant people, and anger can be constructed as inappropriate for people in subordinate roles. You shouldn't be angry, you should be grateful, right? We tend to attribute female emotion to disposition, like that's her personality, okay? And male emotionality to circumstance, right? He's angry because of the traffic. So let's delve deeper into a couple of emotions, say anger and happiness. Anger is an intense emotional state that involves strong, uncomfortable feelings. It's considered a non-cooperative response to a perceived provocation, to hurt or threat. So you have a stress system with a fight or a flight response, and this is part of your fight response. And at times, given the context, fighting is an adaptive response. And it's evoked by our sense that somebody else has done something wrong. We interpret they've done it willfully, it's unjustified, they didn't have to do it. It can also be evoked by smaller frustrations. They're called daily hassles. So you're going to work, but there's a traffic jam, and now you ran out of gas, and now you forgot your lunch. Okay, and enough of those can also kind of drive people over the edge. There is a relationship between sort of anger and dominance. That anger does sort of increase testosterone. Testosterone is an interesting hormone. There's an assumption that it's sort of causally linked to aggression, and there's some evidence for that. But one thing that's really interesting is that if you give men and women testosterone shots before a game, where in that setup, the way you win is by being nice and friendly, people who get the testosterone shots are more social and cooperative and nice and friendly. And that suggests that testosterone is about winning. Fighting is one way to win. Okay? And anger does tend to be socially constructed as inappropriate for those of lower social status, and seen not as a good, right, just thing, but as an out of control, dangerous, potentially violent kind of thing. Okay. So we interpret people's emotions differently based on context. Context matters. In Solomon's cognitivist theory of emotions, anger is something that is expressed between equals, right? Maybe if you and your equal status friend are angry at each other, maybe you can yell at each other. Maybe you can get those feelings out. Maybe you can realize, oh shit, I didn't realize that, I was violating this boundary I didn't know you had, right? Maybe it can be healthy. Okay, so maybe you can take actions to address whatever the harm or the threat is. You can use it to set boundaries. You can promote justice. You can redress grievances. But in human social life, there are hierarchies and power differences that affect the expression of emotions like anger, how they're expressed and how they're perceived and interpreted by others. So in this model, contempt is a combination of anger and disgust. And it's somebody who's higher up in the totem pole or the pecking order or whatever it is, the tree, looking down on someone below. Okay? And the person who feels contempt views the target as unworthy. Okay? And they have a cool disregard for them. There's a belief that the target should remove themselves. Like, I'm not even going to talk to you, go away. Okay? They will not confront or deal directly with the target. This disgusting spider can be removed by someone else, the maid, right? The police, not by me. Right? There's a belief that someone else should remove that person if they don't remove themselves. And there's social exclusion. And the person that is contemptuous might express their feelings to somebody else, right? Someone that they talk to, not that person. And so you can get into these like sort of gossipy situations. Okay. Now, what about the other side, resentment, when you are angry at somebody that has more power than you? Is it safe to express that anger? Is it safe to say, what the hell? No, it's not safe, right? You're supposed to be grateful. You're supposed to be okay with that. You can't really express it. And so resentment is anger that is combined with a perception of unfairness. There's fear, there's bitterness, there's disappointment. And if you can't do anything about it, there can be a feeling of hopelessness. Okay, it can lead to agitation or dejection. Okay, so what are you going to do about your angry feeling when you don't have the power or the permission to express it or act on it? What's that going to do? So if you get into studying conflict resolution, I want you to notice how that discipline tends to construct conflicts as between equal status parties, when in fact, that's typically not the case. And it complicates things a lot, because how are you going to come together and actively listen to each other when one of you or one of your group is contemptuous and the other one is resentful? So anger can be harmful, right? There is research that shows that chronic feelings of hostility are connected to heart disease. It puts a lot of pressure on your system if your heart is racing and you have all that tension going on, and you're flooded with all those stress hormones. Yeah, over time, that's going to wear things down. Okay. And there's questions about catharsis. Like there's, I think there's somewhere, I don't know if it's still open, but you can like go smash plates. My friend took another friend there on her birthday, like you get like a bat and you just like smash stuff, throw stuff. Has anyone gone to one of those? I kind of want to go. So there's research on whether catharsis helps or not. And it's possible that it could spiral, right? That expressing anger just makes you more angry. In social life, expressions of frustration that look uncontrolled cause people to kind of downgrade your social status. And that's very key to workplace bullying, okay? It looks like the person's sort of out of control and crazy and dangerous. So that can be used instrumentally if you're ever in a conflict with management, right? Doing really shitty things that make you angry. Oh, look at that person, they're a problem. See how that one works? But anger can be used adaptively, right? It can be used in a way that communicates strength and competence and motivates actions, right? It can be used to address and resolve conflicts. And when is that done well? It probably looks like assertively and courageously standing up to someone in a controlled way, okay? Using an opportunity to set and to communicate clear boundaries. In order to do that, it can help to get distance. That might not be your first reaction. That might be your 2 days from now kind of reaction. And it can help to have emotional support to talk to other people about it before you respond. And they say that, if you really can't do anything about it, then maybe the best things is to forgive. So I want to bring this back to adaptability, right? What is adaptability? It's using your resources in a way that gets you what you want. And so maybe your anger can be a resource. Or maybe you can use it in a way, like by turning it inward, that undermines yourself. Okay, same thing used in different ways could get different results. Okay, so that's anger. Now I'm going to switch to happiness. That's something that people tend to pursue. I think that's like in the American Constitution, like the pursuit of happiness. So it's up there on most people's lists of things they want. So I want to start with a question and ask you, well, what is happiness? What do you think happiness is? What is that? Nobody knows what happiness is. So you're getting at the idea that there's some kind of variability in definition. And if you look through your textbook, which has a section on happiness, you may note that I believe there is no definition. Do you know what happiness means for you personally then? Okay, feeling good. That's a start. What is a good feeling? I mean, like the feeling of pleasure. It's a pleasurable feeling. Like the way you feel after you bite into a delicious apple. Yes.
I don't know if this is necessarily correct, but I would say I would define it as being sustained over a longer period of time.
Interesting. So the first thing you said was you don't know if it's necessarily correct. There is no clear operational definition, and I don't have the authority to tell you that. So, and then the second part is that you think it's something that is sustained over a long period of time versus maybe you can have a more momentary feeling of joy, which would be fleeting. And yes.
Not being stressed.
Not being stressed. So you're constructing is the absence of distress. So maybe something like relaxation or contentment. Anyone else for happiness? Okay, so there's no clear operational definition of this thing that if you become a psychologist, a counselor, that your clients will be coming to you for. How about that? So it's used in a lot of different ways. So it's used to refer to mental or emotional states like positive or pleasant emotions. It ranges in duration or intensity from, let's say, fleeting joy or from contentment, satisfaction to intense joy. So sometimes in your textbook, they're talking about satisfaction. Other times I'm talking about joy. It's not clear what we're talking about. We're talking about 10 different things. It's also used in the context of life satisfaction. Sometimes when your book talks about happiness, you're talking about satisfaction. Well, does feeling satisfied mean feeling joy? Satisfaction sounds like a long-term kind of thing. Sometimes it's used in the sense of subjective well-being. And then another discussion to have in a couple of weeks is, well, what does well-being mean? What does mental health mean? Sometimes it's used in the sense of like euphoria. Sometimes it means flourishing and thriving versus being stuck in your life. That's kind of a career concept. So if we just get at the idea that it's a pleasurable or a positive emotion for now, and that emotions have adaptive value, then we can identify that there's an adaptive value to positive emotions, like for society. So people who feel good tend to be more helpful to others. Okay, I'm feeling good, so I will be generous to my friends, so I will help my friend move, so I will go volunteer. Like that kind of energy doesn't really come out of feeling very sort of sad and run down. Okay, and there's an interesting sort of positive spiral where helping other people also makes you feel better. That makes you want to help more, and then makes you feel even better. Sounds like a good spiral to be caught up in. A lot of people believe that money will make them happy. A lot of people spend their entire lives pursuing certain career paths because they think that they'll get this, it'll be success, and it'll make them happy. And it's sort of partly true that money makes you happy, right? If you have nothing, if you don't have a roof over your head, if you can't get food on the table, if you can't afford medications, some money is definitely going to increase your happiness. Okay? But that's not a linear relationship. So sort of a linear relationship between, let's say, happiness and money would be like this. And the more money, the more happiness. And maybe that linear relationship is true at the bottom, but what really happens is that at a certain point, it kind of levels out. I'm not sure what that point is. It depends on the country you're in. Last time I heard the number was $75,000 a year, but that was like many years ago. Maybe that's changed, and I never read the paper that was based on, but there's some value at which more money isn't really going to make you happier because you already have enough, and maybe the more work you have to do to get that money is just more stress. Maybe you just use that money to buy more stuff, and then you have more clutter to deal with. Okay, so at some point it kind of levels out. You can imagine that if somebody had really had nothing, if they're a refugee, you give them $1,000. Wow, you give Bill Gates $1,000, doesn't mean the same thing to him, right? Economic growth in countries that are already affluent does not increase people's well-being. It's like we've kind of reached a point where generally most of us have enough stuff and good enough access to food and medication. That further increases from well-being would come from something non-material. We contextualize anger in terms of power, in terms of inequality, and we can do that with happiness too. So your sense of satisfaction comes from kind of a relative rank rather than an absolute value of income. There's interesting research on happiness, and some of the happiest people actually live with very little, but in conditions where there's, within that context, a lot of equality and community. So it's like everyone's poor together, and they're helping each other. But now, if you have somewhere like, let's say, New York, where you have really poor people relative to that society living around the corner from super rich people, that doesn't make people feel so good. So there's a sense of relative deprivation, which is a perception that you're worse off relative to the comparison, which is the people around you or your own past. I was watching a video of a lecturer at Harvard, and the lecturer was talking about how a friend of his was miserable. He was a millionaire with $60 million. And he was really miserable. He felt like a failure because his friends were billionaires. And his kids who had, earned millions also were acting out in these ways because they were failures, because they also couldn't make billions. Like for us, like 60 million, you think you'd be happy if you had that? Maybe you believe that. Give you $60 million, everything you want, everything's great. No, there's people out there that have $60 million and are miserable because their friends have billionaires. So that a lot of this is based on relative comparisons. Positive psychology is a subdiscipline of psychology that studies human functioning with the goal of discovering strengths and virtues, helping individuals and communities thrive. Right? It looks at what is positive well-being, what character traits or virtues support that, how does that work in the context of community and culture. And if you're interested, there is an undergraduate course on positive psychology here at SMU. So what does research on happiness tell us? Well, it's not that related to some things, and it is related to other things. In individualistic countries, it's related to self-esteem. But that doesn't pan out cross-culturally, say to collectivistic countries. Happy people tend to be optimistic, outgoing, agreeable, humorous. I think this one's probably the most important one, right? Having close, positive, lasting relationships. Your biggest predictor. They have work and leisure that engages their skills, right? They like what they're doing. In more religious cultures, they tend to be people who are religious. I think there's, this is an American textbook, and I've noticed a few things when I'm reading it that tends to be a bit, let's say, like pro-marriage, anti-porn, pro-religion. I don't know if that's kind of come through. But yes, there is in fact research showing that people who are religious tend to be happier, and maybe that's because they have stronger communities. Okay, that could be one reason. And they tend to be people who sleep well, right? Sleep deprivation is one thing that will really mess with your mood. And they tend to exercise. Exercise makes you feel good, releases endorphins. Gender, so the same kind of average. So women have more ups and downs than men, but tend to average out to the same place. And physical attractiveness. A lot of people think that if they were beautiful, if they got plastic surgery, then they'd be happy. No. Okay, so it's more about your relationships, right? Doing things that are right for you and taking care of yourself. So evidence-based suggestions to be happier are to, prioritize your close relationships. Be grateful for what you have, which is probably far more than other people do. One way is to act happy, right? It's like biting that pencil. Then you'll actually feel happier. Okay. Control is a big cause of stress. So one of the most stressful things is the perception of lack of control. So if you can find ways to feel in control or be in control, then that supports your mental well-being. And then of course, taking care of yourself. People spend a lot of time, like even most of their lives, stressing themselves out, doing things like sort of pursuing money, status, success, accolades that they think will make them happy, right? Because there's some social narrative that says this is what success is, this is what you should be. But then those things ultimately don't. Okay, so in fact, we often sacrifice the things that really do make us happy, right? How much time do you spend on your friends, on your family, on eating healthy, on exercising? Or are those the things that you're giving up and sacrificing in order to pursue something, even here, that you think will make you happy? When really those things are the biggest predictors of happiness. So we often sacrifice those things to run what's colloquially known as the rat race. I don't know if, do you guys use that term? It's a 90s term. Okay, yes, you do. And the rat race is that even endless, exhausting, self-defeating, competitive struggle to get ahead that leaves no time for what matters. And in kind of a clinical setting or in a counseling setting, what does successful people look like? Are they in there gushing with happiness? No, they won this award, but now it's about the next thing. And they get that, and then it's about the next thing. That kind of doesn't end. And they could have a lot of personal problems, right? Because they're not focused on their families and they're not focused on their friends. And people who have successful careers, so people who, and I want to use the word success, ironically, can find themselves very, very lonely after retirement. Okay, fundamentally because colleagues are not friends or family. The United Kingdom and Japan both have ministers of loneliness. Right, people in government were the minister of loneliness because it is such a big social problem. Those are highly industrialized nations where people's material needs are like abundantly met, but to the detriment of their social and emotional needs. So let's come back to the idea that emotions are ideally adaptive responses that support your success. And we know what adaptability means. You use your resources to respond in ways that get you what you want. So I have emotions up here. Okay. And some of them are kind of positive ones you want. Some of them are negative ones that you don't want. But I want to encourage you to think of them as being potentially adaptive or being potentially maladaptive. So like, let's say that I went with anger, right? Like how could anger be maladaptive? It's in your textbook. If you're angry and you don't do anything about it, or you can't do anything about it, it can eat away at you. So chronic hostility, that sounds like you're not doing anything about it, leads to heart disease. Anything else that could be maladaptive either to yourself or to society about anger? Anything at all? No? What if you just went and punched somebody? Yes.
It's like expressing your emotions in a social.
Yes, so you could express your emotion, the anger, in ways that are destructive or violent. How could, let's flip the lens. How could anger be adaptive? How is your anger good? Yes.
If you use that anger to motivate yourself to do something.
Yes, your anger is a gift from yourself to yourself that tells you what you need so that you can go get it, what needs to change so that you can go change it. It's what helps you know what your boundaries are because it tells you that they've been violated and now you can go communicate them. So constructive change. It fuels that. You're not going to go out and change the world if you're not angry about it. Yes.
Was like working out as a response to being angry be adaptive, or does an adaptive response to anger have to do with the anger itself?
So in terms of what it does to your body, it's adaptive, right? That is good for your body. If you have stress, working out will help with that. If you have anger, working out will help with that. If you have sadness, working out will help with that. But do you need to go do something out in the world because you're angry? Is there a conversation you need to have with your parents or your partners or your professors or your boss because something isn't right? And so would getting rid of the anger be the adaptive thing? Yes, if you can't change anything. Then you need to deal with the feeling and put it away and forgive and let it go. But if you can use it to change something, then you'd want to go do that. So context matters. Let's flip from anger to joy. So how could, let's say, joy, positive emotion, be adaptive? I'll throw one out there. It's a reward that can be used to motivate people and kind of operant conditioning. It's inherently pleasurable. Yes.
As for adaptive joy, I feel like if you share it to others.
Yeah, it's contagious.
Yeah.
How could joy be maladaptive? Yes.
I guess it could be like self-centered joy, so like showing off.
Yeah. Yeah, you could be harming some way, harming others in the pursuit of that. Yes.
Maybe rewarding yourself so much that the reward isn't needed.
Yeah, so you can abuse or overuse a reward. When somebody uses something like cocaine, what are they seeking? What does that drug do? How does it make you feel? It can bring you that feeling, right? People can chase this to the point that it becomes destructive to themselves and to others. There is a skill, and it's a learned skill, in understanding how and where and when to use your resources, whatever they are, including your feelings, your natural reactions, in ways that support your success and the success of, your community or the human community as a whole. And there will likely be some trial and error learning along the way. Any questions? No? Okay. So for next class on Thursday, we'll be talking about stress and so the impacts of stress on your body, health, and coping. And before you go, how are you guys doing? We're in week 9 now. We're getting to about 70% of the course. Could you give me a show of hands if you're feeling great or really great? Joyful zone. Much less than usual, but I'm glad to see. And if you're sort of okay, hanging in there, good. Okay, and if you're in the green to purple, please connect with me if that would be adaptive. Thank you for your attention.